been so much involved in putting together the program for this year's Build piece, but I also saw it for the first time yesterday. And
it's exciting,
really
right?
looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Really excited. So that's kind of an awkward way of saying, like, come join us there. But first, it's really nice to have you all here and to have a moment with you to share a little bit what some of our lessons were on using WhatsApp for peace building consultation processes. And I was wondering, okay, what might people be interested in? And you probably, most of you joined because you're interested in using it yourself for your own processes. So I will first just give you a little bit of an intro on like what process we used it for, so you can see kind of what is possible, and then share a few learnings that are more on the kind of macro peace building level, and then inviting you to explore kind of what is needed to set it up for your own process. But I wanted to start first on kind of a public service announcement, which I feel is relevant in today's day and age. Of course, this is not kind of a webinar to promote WhatsApp, but it's just one of the tools you can use. It is a problematic tool in many senses because it's free, so you are, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. So this is just kind of, before we start to delve into it, kind of a reminder to be mindful of the information that Facebook collects when you use WhatsApp. So kind of, if you have issues with people participating who are then linked to each other and that data being collected by a large company, you should just think about that. But basically the way we fell into that was just because COVID was just starting at the beginning of a large-scale research project we had planned. We were supporting Interpeace in an effort to collect and kind of have a participatory data process around factors of conflict and resilience in Burkina Faso, and we were kind of accompanying them through the process and also managing the data collection with an awesome team from a Burkinabe organization called Laboratoire Citoyenneté. And we were just left with travel restrictions and then having to run this process in a very low connectivity environment. So WhatsApp was just basically the last option we had to engage, because anything that would have required more bandwidth was simply not possible physically. So we were saying, okay, WhatsApp is the last one, shall we try? And we tried, and we feel that it really worked out. That's why we thought we might share this with others who might be in a similar situation. Just briefly what we used it for. So we basically used it throughout the whole participatory research process. So we used it for a consultation with about 60 key national and regional stakeholders in Burkina Faso, who defined the questionnaire of the research and validated that. All of that was done on WhatsApp. And then we also used it to manage, to train enumerators who were then collecting the data, and to manage basically all of the interaction with them and all of the organization. And we also used it at the end to do a participatory analysis of the data that was coming out, because that was kind of the logic behind this process, and why we were engaging in it as Build Up is that we have this value of making sure that any process is as participatory as possible. So we're supporting organizations in kind of not just doing extractive research, but then building a process around it. And maybe just a word on one of the workshops that I will build quite a lot of the lessons on. We used WhatsApp for this first workshop I mentioned to you, where we went all the way from identifying the themes for the research, then prioritizing those with the representative group of participants, identifying indicators for each of the themes that we had identified, defining what kind of demographic variables we wanted to use in the research, and then having kind of a validation discussion on the questionnaires itself in a few rounds with all of the participants. I'm just telling you that to just tell you it was a fairly complex endeavor for a workshop to begin with, and we really felt that it worked out in the end. So a few of the lessons that I'm having kind of 2 months after, or I have lost track of time. It's Corona times. I think it's more than 2 months after the first workshop, but kind of looking back, I think it was really interesting to reflect on a few things. So one of the lessons is that you are still running a workshop. So basically, for it to work, you need the human connection and trust as you need for any peace building process. So just because you are behind a screen and not in front of an audience, doesn't mean that you have to change any of the things you would usually do in a workshop. So we made really sure that the participants knew who was part of the facilitation team. We used, as you can see here, pictures, but we also used voice. So we would record an introduction about ourselves so that participants really knew who we were. And then we asked them as well to introduce themselves to just make sure that people know who is in this room. It's as important in a physical room as it is in a virtual room, even more important potentially for a virtual room, to make sure that participants know who they are talking to and what that might carry for them in terms of risks or opportunities. A funny thing actually happened because we had sent pictures for our introductions when we asked people to introduce themselves and just say like, write their name and their affiliation. People also started to send their pictures. So it was interesting to see that this kind of visual element that we triggered then came back from participants as well. So what we did was then just kind of put together little cards that summarized who is in the room and sent them back to participants. That was a kind of small playful thing we had there. Maybe one last point on this kind of like, it's still the human element that counts. One recommendations I would have for you as you try it is to stay true to your own facilitation style that you have usually. So for those who read French, you can read in this last kind of screenshot I gave you there that we were running late doing an analysis on something, and kind of my usual style is just to be like very honest and candid about this and kind of and tell them that we take a little longer, and so that's what we did as well in the online space, and that kind of created a little bit of connection with the participants as well that went on then beyond the workshop itself. The second lesson we learned was, and something that probably the thing that surprised me most, was that it was incredible how focused people were when they had to contribute something. And you know, if you are in a room and people are kind of getting coffee and then they're coming back and you start the session and people are on their phones because they're busy and have a lot of emails coming in that constantly distract them. We actually felt that the contributions you would get on substance were quite a lot better than what I would expect from a big group that has to like develop indicators together in a collective setting. So I'm just showing you kind of this is just one of the examples when we were at the end, kind of defining and refining questions. Everyone was using track changes to kind of suggest wordings, and people were really there and focused on the task at hand. Why was that the case? I'm not so sure. I think there were two factors. One was that everybody was interested in trying to see how this will be run on WhatsApp, so you had people's attention, but also because a few of them were still doing this on the phone. So once you have that, once you're working on something on the phone, you're probably less distracted by other things that might come in as you do so, and you don't have like an extra device that constantly asks for your attention. But that's just something I can guess about. The third lesson was around like dynamics of inclusion and exclusion and bias, which seem to work differently online and are an area you need to pay attention to, because of course if you it really depends who you're trying to reach, but you will also always lose out on people that don't have the possibility to buy credit and be online on WhatsApp, even if the use of WhatsApp is going up quite drastically. So for our case, because we had kind of a key stakeholder group of civil society representatives and political figures, it was less of an issue, but obviously you would have to think about who you're losing out and do a proper analysis if you start thinking about doing this for yourself. What I found most interesting were the dynamics around bias, because I mean, if you look at, this is a screenshot from a group discussion, and obviously the participants, they only see a number of someone who contributes something or who asks a question. So you don't have the usual what's happening in a room where oftentimes, depending on the dynamics of the place you're working in, you would have women who are listened to less, or everybody would listen if certain important people would speak, but not if others speak who they identify as being part of a group. In a way, the fact of doing it on WhatsApp equalized the playing field, because you have to read what people say because you don't know who is contributing what. That was something that I realized only later and found quite interesting as a dynamic. Of course, people would be able to then like click on the number and see the picture to identify someone, or and judge like where they're from and who they belong to. But that is quite an effort if you are in a fast-paced discussion on a WhatsApp group. Last point, maybe on kind of inclusion and exclusion. I talked about who you might lose out on, but we had also this experience of actually being able to include a few people that we wouldn't have been able to include in an in-person session. One person actually like came up to me, he wrote me a message saying like, oh, this was really interesting to be part of this, because he was living in a very remote place in the Sahel region in Burkina Faso, and wouldn't probably have been invited to come to Ouagadougou for the same discussion. So it was at the same time as you have exclusion dynamics that you need to be mindful of, you also have a lot more possibilities to include people in the conversation that you might otherwise not have, because your workshop is taking place in the capital city of a place. So those are the kind of three main lessons, the kind of issues around human connection, where it's also important then to explain and set expectations before you even start. Make sure, as I explained, that people know who you are and who is in the room. Stay true to your own style. And then something we did at the end was actually that the group we used for discussions, we handed them over to participants, and they are still using it to share information about upcoming events or something that happens in their context, and sometimes also just to engage in some banter and get updates from each other. So we have these 50 people, and obviously not all of them are still chatting to each other, but it's still an active space for exchange. The only thing we have learned in another process that you need to be mindful of is make sure that you set rules for the discussion, just to make sure that people understand kind of that this is still a professional sharing space, because otherwise you know the dynamic that WhatsApp groups are just used to share everything, and you might risk having like controversial issues that are being shared that then you need to also moderate a little bit. Lesson 2, I went into that quite a bit. You actually get more focused contributions, but I will go into that a little bit more now. You need to plan it well for this to happen. And then the third lesson was around inclusion, exclusion, and bias, kind of the call for studying exclusion patterns before you even start, and the fact that you are basically a number in a discussion and not a woman, a man, or someone from a group that is never listened to. So that was kind of a fast train through some of the kind of top line lessons, but I would like to now enter into just exploring how we actually set it up. So you could also think about using it for your own processes. And there are a few components that I will just walk you through that are important to the design of such a consultation process. One is the kind of question, what sessions need to be live sessions where participants can engage with each other, and what sessions should be individual sessions. And we have made quite good experience, especially because of connection issues, with leaving people a certain amount of time for self-paced contribution. So you can kind of run through the agenda of this one workshop where it actually worked quite well, where participants would always have like between 2 and 5 hours to contribute their ideas for themes, for example, or then to do a small prioritization exercise. So they were able to kind of do that next to other work that they had planned, and only had to be there physically at a certain time for the live sessions we've had. The live sessions are quite difficult to manage. I will tell you a little bit more about those afterwards, but basically when you do individual sessions, you send the piece of input you need, or some input you want to relay to all of the participants, and then they get back to you. In a live session, you obviously have a group discussion, and there's a limit to the complexity of issues you can discuss in a group. So because we had the unfortunate situation not to be able to, for example, get everybody together for a Zoom discussion, the discussions in the group were quite limited. I can tell you, if you're interested in that, in exploring that a little bit further during the Q&A, I can tell you more about it. So that's kind of the one question, the agenda setting and how you put it together. Then you have a design decision you can make of using broadcast versus group discussions. So WhatsApp allows you, and I didn't know this before having to do this, WhatsApp allows you to put together a broadcast list of about, I think it's 200 people maximum, where you put together the list, and then each message or video or whatever you send to that particular list gets sent to everybody, and it looks like they receive an individual message for you. 2 things about that: it's really great to share content, but if your group is big and people respond to you individually, you get into quite a messy situation of having to manage a lot of responses, so you need to be smart about how you collect input. But the other thing is that there's a technicality you need to be mindful of, which is that WhatsApp only allows you to spam people who actually want to be spammed. So if anybody on your broadcast has to have your number registered on their phone as a contact. So that's just, as you set something up, it's really important to remind people that they have to save your number, because otherwise you won't be able to reach them through a broadcast. It's a very understandable restriction that they put in there. Very good one. So yeah, that's the kind of broadcast sending mode, and then the group discussion, you just make a simple WhatsApp group like the one you probably all have with your families by now. One thing that's important for group discussions, I mentioned already, it tends to get quite messy, especially if you have big groups. Of course, you can break them down like you would in a normal workshop, just make a smaller room. But still, it's quite important to have a few kind of discussion rules if you really want to debate an issue. What we did is that we just told participants, look, this is going to be complicated and messy to manage, so only write something if you actually want to say something, and not like, oh yeah, I agree with what has been said, or something that happens quite a lot in French-speaking countries is that people respond saying like rien à signaler, to say like, I don't have anything to say because I've understood what's happening here. And that is obviously kind of messing with the flow of your group, and makes it difficult to follow the conversation. So we told them like, only contribute if you kind of disagree or want to make a specific point. And then another trick is just to remind people to use the WhatsApp response function, so you always know which threads belong together. And then we also got a little bit creative, but don't get over creative, with using like a few icons that had a specific sense in the discussion. So we would always mark a contribution from facilitators with this kind of pin, the red pin you have on WhatsApp, or like if we asked people for a contribution to fill in a survey or something, then we would always put a little phone sign next to it, just to have a little bit of a visual language to communicate with people. So that's kind of the setup and managing discussions options. You have quite a few options as well to relay content, and again, it's just like normal facilitation, be a bit creative and use different types of options you have for relaying content. So we're often using video, and very simply just recording videos on Zoom and then sharing them to, for example, give an input on a certain theme, or explain a platform, an analysis platform that you really need to understand the details of. We've also used voice quite a bit, and got feedback from participants that they appreciated that. So if we would, for example, in trainings where we've used this as well, when participants submit an exercise, we would then rather than type our feedback, we would record a voice note. So you just also have this more personal connection with participants. And then use visuals, because that's how we are primed to function. For example, I would always use, when there were like inputs for self-paced contribution session, I would always use like the same blue cards, which I made very simply like in PowerPoint, and exporting them as JPEG with a clock on it, so people would know, okay, by 6 I have to submit these and these exercises, and then I need to make sure that I'm ready for the live session tomorrow that starts at 2. So if you use the same language throughout, it becomes like your kind of mini communication language with participants. Last point on the setup would be around options to collect inputs. I mentioned to you that you're doing yourself a disservice by asking inputs in a direct way, because individuals will, it will just come in as individual WhatsApp messages for you, and then you have 50 individual chats that you need to manage. So what we've used quite a lot is Google Forms, because then if, for example, you're asking for indicators on 5 themes, you can ask people to fill this in a form, and you automatically get an Excel where you have all of the contributions neatly ordered for you to then put them together or cluster them. So that worked quite well. But it was interesting that it worked super well in the first workshop. A few months later, it didn't work at all. So the connection was really different, although it was the same people talking from exactly the same locations. One other thing we used quite a bit, and which I came to appreciate a lot, is Mentimeter. It's a free resource where you can also collect certain contributions or have people vote on priorities. And the nice thing there is that you can also send them the link of incoming contributions. So not just the link to contribute, but also to watch as like contributions come in. And that's a nice kind of interactive thing, especially if you ask for comments or for questions, for example. Once your participant submits their questions, they can then go to the other link and then just see what kinds of questions others were asking. It's also quite nice to cluster themes, for example, by priority, or just like get input on different things. Yeah. So that was a super fast train, and I'm looking forward to engaging with you in a discussion now.
Amazing, Claudia, and you already have your first question in, but let me just first invite everyone else that this would be a great time to add your questions to the Q&A. We have about 15 minutes left, so put those in if you have them. So this is a question. Hi, Claudia, thank you for the presentation. Just wanted to ask whether you have published any paper on this, and if you have, can you please share?
We haven't. I have a blog post that I've started to write in about April and that I haven't finished yet. So there's something coming with like the same lessons I'm sharing, but we haven't had the time to kind of digest everything. We were still running different processes in parallel.
Right. Is it right though, Claudia, that the results of the consultation and the research that you did is available and published online, right?
The results of the consultation was feeding into kind of a larger interpiece process. They had like a quantitative research part that was ongoing that we were managing, and that was this process. And then they also had a more qualitative part to it. So for now, the results are kind of with interpiece. But what I can already share with you is kind of the data that we visualize, but that's a whole other topic, but I can share the link which just show the kind of basic quantitative results of the consultation.
All right, we have another question in as well. This is from Karen. How much information was necessary for the participants to work smoothly on WhatsApp? I lost my question. There we go. Like the technical info, use meaning of icons, how to use various other tools like Mentimeter, etc. She says it sounds like a lot of planning. And I'm just reading this. I know you can read this, Claudia, but reading this out for anyone who's just watching. Yeah. So what was your experience on that? Did you have technical support staff?
We were like 2 people running this from Berlin and Bujumbura. So no, we didn't have any technical support staff. We were like, but we tag teamed quite a bit, because then someone would kind of start clustering while the other person would still respond to questions that may come up. But definitely, if you try to do it, try to be a team of at least 2 to 3. The beautiful thing about it is actually that most of the tools we used were quite self-explanatory. So you would, the meaning of icons you have to explain once, just as a one-liner, and people got it really, really quickly. And then for Mentimeter, you can just, we were basically also just saying like, please contribute your thoughts here, and then you put the link and people fill it in. That was not so much of an issue. So as long as we didn't have any connection issues, we didn't have any questions from participants back, which is quite amazing.
All right, I have a question while others are coming in. I thought that point was so interesting about like just being a number, and then that like forming this different level of participation. Do you ever see a situation where you would choose to do a WhatsApp, like even if you weren't travel restricted?
Interesting. I mean, there's a few different considerations to that, right? We're still flying way too much to like run small, short workshops like these. So from that perspective, obviously, we could do more. We could do more online. You still have a few aspects that are just like where you miss the human connection. So for something like this, where you have a group of 60 that you would otherwise obviously have like a drink in the evening and just exchange a little bit more, it's not as much of an issue, but we've also used WhatsApp now in our fellowship programs, where we do like a first training with them, and not kind of having met the teams that you're accompanying for a whole year is just weird. So yeah, the human connection obviously is still the preference, but you can get something out of it.
Yeah, that's helpful. All right, here is another question. This one's from Laura. Let's do questions. First, have you used WhatsApp with participants from oppositional groups or just consultation with like-minded participants? Mm-hmm. And second, did you also divide the group into smaller groups for discussions, or in general, do you think that's a realistic option using WhatsApp?
Yeah, so we've had quite a mixed group in the consultations. So, and we have put this together with Interpeace, who are kind of running the program and have their like network there to just be representative of different opinions and different groups in the country. So yes, we had a relatively diverse group there, but the point of it was not so much having like a reconciliation or a peace building process between these groups, right? So you had the discussions, obviously, if you discuss peace and conflict, of course you talk to each other as well, but that was kind of the secondary thing that happens. So I'm not sure how well it will work to really take this as a community intervention. So not sure I would try that. And then on the second question on the smaller groups, yes, you can do that. You just need one facilitator per group, and then you're all set.
But you kept all 60.
Sorry?
But you kept all 60 in one group.
Yeah, we had all 60 in one group because we were just not more facilitators, and it was the first time we tried. We didn't really feel comfortable enough to run into that. But then now I would feel much more comfortable doing that as well. And it's the easy part is that you assign them into groups, so you can also, as you would in a normal workshop, play a little bit on like having a gender mix, etc. in the group. So you can totally do that. Yeah.
Cool. All right, and we're getting through. There's a few more questions here. So this from Megan. Have the participants had opportunities to build on these new relationships they made within the group for new activities or collaborations post-research project time period?
So they're still talking to each other. I don't know of anything very concrete that came out of it, but they are at least kind of getting to know each other better. Yeah.
Cool. This is for Julianne, which makes me giggle a little bit. Julianne's talking about how complex the project is. Mm-hmm. She says, the idea of doing a workshop sounds overwhelming to me because I would think responses would come in fast and furious without a way to moderate discussion one after another. How do you keep it under control? And I just have to add, Julianne, that we frequently share a GIF that we attribute to Claudia, which is like this, someone on a keyboard like typing like this. So this is how we picture her working. But yeah, Claudia, how do you like manage that and keep it under control?
Yeah, that was also the thing, probably the thing that I haven't yet fully figured out. To keep it under control, you need to make sure that you are asking one question at a time, and you need to be really specific with participants that this is the question we're discussing now, and nothing else, and just leave enough time for any live sessions. So in a typical live session, we would get through like 3 more complex sessions, half an hour each, and that was more or less what was possible. Because especially if people don't have connection throughout, they may want to like respond to something that was discussed earlier once they reconnect. So you really need to give it time and be very strict about like what is being discussed, and not have too many ongoing discussions at the same time. But and then sometimes I would just say like, look, this is too much now. We need to slow down. Let us respond to what's coming in, and take a 5-minute break. Those who are there. Yeah.
All right, this is another question from me. And sorry if you mentioned this and I missed it. But did you have these in stages? Because I know you had the image there, but I can't read French completely. So did you have sort of like indicator development, and then I know you had analysis workshops? Like, were there time in between these different stages?
Yeah. So we had the indicator development workshop we ran across like about 10 days. So with like individual sessions and then a live session in between, and a lot of break time in between. That was in April. And then for the analysis workshop, that happened now in September. So yeah, quite a bit of time in between.
Cool. I have notifications, so I'm muting. Are there any other questions from people here? We've got about 5 minutes left, so if you have one that you're typing, put that in. While we're waiting, Claudia, if there's any final questions, I wonder if you want to just give a shout out to your co-facilitator, co-collaborator on the project, and like how that partnership worked.
Yeah. So I think I was just remembering something that I had forgotten. Anyway, it will come back. So what we were like different teams for all of the processes we ran now, build up staff from the team, and then we also collaborated with an institution in Burundi called Senap, who we've known for quite a long time, and it was quite nice to also have this as a kind of cross-institutional partnership that is developing, and also interesting to run a workshop across basically like 3 or 4 locations. We were always making fun that we were like Bujumbura, Berlin, and Barcelona at the time, managing the workshop. Yeah. Oh yeah, and that's the complicated part actually, because you're likely in that situation right now that restrictions are going up again on whether you can meet in one room. Only one person can manage the broadcast. So you need to make sure that all of the others are kind of contributing other things, because one person gets all of the answers or questions. So you need to tag them a little bit on responding to certain questions, for example. So what we would do is that we would just like I would copy questions into a Google document, and then Jean-Marie and I would like respond to them, and I would send them again. Yeah.
Like somewhere of this.
Yeah. Back to the GIF.
So one last just like technical question for me, because I think that's interesting, all like these little technical tips you probably learned along the way. Are we talking about just WhatsApp that I have on my phone, or were you using WhatsApp for business or like any other external tools?
Yeah, so I ended up using WhatsApp for business, and that's the point I forgot to make before, which is like it's really good to separate your private and your work WhatsApp lives, because otherwise it's just getting a bit too much and you can't separate. So I have a dual SIM phone, but you can also do it with another phone and another number, and then you can just download the WhatsApp business app, which is also free because you're the product. And with WhatsApp Business, you can do a few things that are quite interesting, especially if you're not using it for a workshop, but rather for a consultation where you invite contributions. One of the things, and I'm smiling now because Julie knows much more about this by now than I do, is that you can program automated responses. So the first person, the person, if someone like writes to you for the first time, you can program it in a way that they get the same response. So you could, for example, what we did a few times now is just put out an information about the consultation process happening and saying, like, if you want to participate, write hello to this number, and then obviously hello or anything else the person writes triggers an automated response where you can then write something like, oh, great that you're interested to participate, to register, go to this link, or to start a course, as is the case in Julie's case, you just like download this page or register there. So that's quite a useful feature. And you can also program short responses that I haven't used so much, but that's the other thing that's different. Otherwise, there's not much in terms of functionality that is so different from your normal WhatsApp. But the good thing is that you can have it on the same phone, and in separate apps.
Yeah, I see the value of that, definitely.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claudia. I'll be your one person applause here. I think I can say for everyone attending though that it's been really interesting, and I know that you've been doing something, I know a little bit about the project, but to hear about it in detail and all the lessons has been really valuable for me, and I think for everyone. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, to everyone who wants to share this afterwards with your team or wants to revisit a point of it, the recording of this will be made available on our webinars and events page on the How to Build Up website. I just put it in the chat there. This webinar topic is also quite relevant to a recent free online course that we published in that same community and learning link on remote capacity building. So this is one of the projects that's featured in that course, but there are others as well. So if you're looking at how to adapt some of these capacity building or consultations online, that could be another place that you can look. And just one more plug that you can learn more about this and other projects like it at the Build Peace Conference that's coming up November 6th to 8th. Be sure to check that out. And Claudia just put in her email.
Yeah, I mean, these days it takes me like 2 weeks to reply to you, but if there was something that when you set it up for yourself, you have questions about, I'm always happy to respond with a bit of delay, but I will eventually get to it. Yeah, so feel free to reach out.
You're not gonna give us your WhatsApp number? Just kidding, Claudia. Email's totally sufficient. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Bye.
Thank you.